Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 286. Greta, on a
Hey.
scale of 1 to incredible, how would you describe your last week?
Ooh, I like we're mixing it up.
I mix it up every week. It's always a new thing
You
every
always
week.
is it?
Well, I usually say day. How's your day going so far? But this is your week.
You've never given me a scale before though.
Well, on a scale of 1 to incredible, how was your last week?
I would say pretty fantabulous.
Pretty fantabulous. All right.
How about you?
Pretty, I would say somewhat fantabulous.
Oh.
Somewhat fantabulous.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well,
Right.
it's better than not fantabulous.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. I hope all of you are having a fantabulous week as well.
Absolutely.
If not
as
an
always.
incredible week.
As always. Well, I hope this notches up the fantabulousness of the week by listening to this episode. In this episode, we will be discussing Chapter 7 of the Silmarillion, of the Silmarils and the Unrest of the Noldor.
Action packed.
Things not so fantabulous with the Noldor this week.
No, unfortunately.
Before we get started, we'd like to give a double up air five to our patrons. Get those hands up. You've had sufficient warning. 3, 2, 1. Whoopsht. Boom.
Oh, I had to make sure I got both my hands in there.
I think you did it.
Okay.
Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, and Jacob Lockham. And a shout out to our newest patrons, Don J., Peter B., Stephen S., and Jacob S., who is actually a welcome back.
Awesome.
Yes.
It's so exciting to see our Patreon growing.
Absolutely.
Really
Absolutely.
exciting.
We love
Yeah.
the expansion of our fellowship, right? The expansion of our fellowship. So
Absolutely.
it's very cool. Become a patron by visiting patreon.com/TolkienRoad. Becoming a patron is easy and lands you a bunch of cool perks like episodes early and ad-free. Furthermore, your financial support helps us to keep on evering on. Learn more at patreon.com/TolkienRoad. Hey, YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit the subscribe button if you're not yet subscribed. Don't hit it if you're already subscribed because that'll unsubscribe you. And let us know what's on your mind in the comments below. Right?
Yeah,
So, yes.
please. And thank you.
Boom. All right. So, our Tolkien quote of the week comes from Chapter 7. As three great jewels they were in form, but not until the end, when Fëanor shall return, who perished ere the sun was made, and sits now in the halls of awaiting and comes no more among his kin. Not until the sun passes and the moon falls shall it be known of what substance they were made.
I'm glad you picked this one
Yeah.
because I didn't quite understand it.
Hmm.
I read it a couple times,
Mm-hmm.
and I understand the general gist, but the part I don't understand is when it says, when Fëanor shall return, who perished ere the sun was made, and sits now in the halls of awaiting.
Yeah.
So is that okay? I get that, like Fëanor is like they're basically saying that we're not going to know what the Silmarils are made of until this time, or these particular conditions are met.
Right.
Okay, and one of those conditions is that when Fëanor shall return.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work? Is it because he's an elf? Like he's like so many questions. Let me start here. The halls of awaiting.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the same as the halls of Mandos?
I believe so.
Mondos.
That's
Okay.
how I take it.
Okay, and they're able to return from there.
If they are permitted to, right? If they're granted to.
Have we talked about this before? Because this sounds new to me.
I mean, we've alluded to it. I don't think we've had an in-depth discussion about it.
Okay.
But yeah, so at some point Fëanor will return. Now, just my cursory reading of this, I took it to mean like at the end of the world, right? Like, but maybe there is some other time, right? That I don't know of anywhere where Tolkien addresses this directly, other than just this. It's not something I'd really researched,
Okay.
but it's perhaps somewhere in the history of Middle Earth, maybe he talks more about this, what he had envisioned for this. So,
Okay.
yeah.
I mean, the underworld makes sense because it talks about the sun passing and the moon falling.
Right.
But I guess I was just trying to figure out how those two things were kind of connected. And I didn't realize. So he's basically talking about the resurrection of the dead. Is that basically what he's talking about here?
Well, he's talking about the end of the world, right? He's just like,
Well-
and in terms of Middle Earth, the Middle Earth Legendarium, that's not a thing, right? Like, at
Right.
least
I
it's
meant
not
like
a
his interpretation
yeah.
of that as far as Middle Earth goes.
right.
Okay.
So
All right. That's cool.
yeah, I just take it to mean like in the far distant future, when at the end of the world, right?
Okay.
And there are other there are other points made about like the end of the world, right? Like in terms of the Middle Earth Legendarium. So, this isn't like without precedence to speak of the end of the world, right?
Right. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Good question.
Oh, well, thank you.
All right. So, what are the Silmarils and what is their significance? We finally reach the answer to these questions in Chapter 7, learn of the intrigue surrounding them and how their existence becomes a curse for the Blessed Realm. So, this book is called the Silmarillion. And for the first, several chapters of it, we have not really done much discussing of why it is called this. So today we find out where the book gets its name, right? Like, we find out what these Silmarils really are and why the story is named after them. So, pretty exciting, right? Pretty pivotal chapter here with Chapter 7.
For sure.
In Chapter 7, we'll learn of Fëanor's creation of the Silmarils, of Melkor's lust for the Silmarils and his insidious operations after his release from prison, and of the conflict that arises from Melkor's treacherous whisperings amongst the Noldor and Fëanor's jealous guarding of the Silmarils. So as with each episode, we won't be covering every detail of this chapter, but instead doing our best to hit the high points and unpack interesting and important details. If we missed something you guys want to discuss more, let us know. Great place to do so is in the comments below, or you can just hit us up via private correspondence if you'd prefer. All right. So first thing I want to call out, and I've been trying to do this more with the last couple of episodes, but I'm referencing here Volume 10 of the History of Middle Earth this time around with the Silmarillion. One of the reasons being is that it's got this really great timetable. It's got a timetable that gives specific dates for all of the events that we learn about in the Silmarillion. Now, this was never published by Tolkien during his lifetime, and so it's not necessarily official in that capacity, but it's the best guide we have to what these dates might have been, right? And so remember last week we talked about Melkor was imprisoned for 3 ages, right? Well, how long exactly was that? And then we learned that it was 300 Valinorian years, and so roughly 3,000 of ours, like what we think of as a year, right? Sun years, right? So he was imprisoned for 3,000 sun years. Now, that was from 1100 to 1400 of the years of the trees, right? So in Valinorian time. And the events this week in this chapter pick up in the year 1449 of the Valinorian calendar, right? The years of the trees. So I'm just going to read this little snippet from here. In the year 1449, Fëanor began that labor of his which is renowned above all the works of the Eldalier. For his heart conceived the Silmarils, and he made much study and many essays ere their fashioning could begin. And though Melkor said after that Fëanor had his instruction in that work, he lied in his lust and his envy. For Fëanor was driven by the fire of his own heart only, and was eager and proud, working ever swiftly and alone, asking no aid and brooking no counsel. So 1449 was the year of that, and that would be 49 Valinorian years after Melkor is released from prison, and so 490 of our sun years. I just like to have these dates here. I think it's I think doing this for the rest of this series on the Silmarillion is actually going to be very interesting and very helpful. Yeah. To kind of fix in our minds just how much time has elapsed between various events.
Yeah. I agree.
This is really where things start to speed up, right? This is where things really start to get crazy. And it's been, while there have been wars and such things previously, it's been peace in Valinor for a while. And we've had a lot of exposition so far. This is really going to show how the action begins. So Yeah, Fëanor creates the Silmarils. So why did he create the Silmarils? Let's start there. Greta, would you do me the honor of reading this paragraph in blue right here?
Yes, I will. For Fëanor, being come to his full might, was filled with a new thought. Or it may be that some shadow of foreknowledge came to him of the doom that drew near. And he pondered how the light of the trees, the glory of the blessed realm, might be preserved imperishable. Then he began a long and secret labor, and he summoned all his lore, and his power, and his subtle skill. And at the end of all, he made the Silmarils.
Yeah. So what jumps out to me about that is, the bit of speculation as to why he conceived the Silmarils in the first place. So a shadow of foreknowledge came to him of the doom that drew near, right? It may be that a shadow of foreknowledge came to him of the doom that drew near, and he pondered how the light of the trees, the glory of the blessed realm, might be preserved imperishable. Okay? So, this idea of preserving, right? That we want to, that this thing is, this blessed realm, the light of this blessed realm is such a wonderful thing, and we want to preserve it. The preservation is one of the, key things that elves strive to do, right? Throughout the Middle-earth legendarium. The three rings that the elves later have, to some degree, have a power, grant them a power of preserving, right? Grant the three elvish ring bearers a power of preserving. So this theme of being able to preserve that which is beautiful and deemed worth preserving is a strong, it's a strong theme that runs through all of the lore of Middle Earth. So that, they speculate that might really be the guiding light, right? That first of all, Fëanor being a Noldor, he is a maker, right? He is one that desires to make, right? Remember, they have most affinity towards Aule, who himself was a maker. And so, this is, it's these things that guide Fëanor in the creation of these Silmarils in the first place. These three holy jewels. So.
Yeah. So I mean, really, you could say his intentions were good, right? I mean, why not want to preserve something that is so special and hallowed? What kind of jumped out to me in here was the word secret. And that I feel like that's kind of an interesting balance to the fact that this actually was a good thing in and of itself, right? It was well intentioned, but the fact that he did it in secret, I feel like that might be a little bit of foreshadowing to or alluding to the fact that maybe this is going to turn out to not to be such a good thing.
Yeah, these sorts of secret labors generally don't turn out very well, right? And we think of Aule creating the dwarves in secret, and that turned out all right in the end, but it was definitely it was sus that he was doing that, right? And even with the I feel like there's something of this later on in the creation of the Rings of Power, that they were crafted in secret, and obviously in that case they were crafted by Sauron for a rather dark purpose. But just the creation of these three here made me think of the parallel between the creation of the three Silmarils and then the creation of the three rings of power for the elves, right? That they all had, they maybe had certain parallel purposes, right? So related purposes in the creation, and one of them being just the preservation of these things, but that the labor in secret, we'll see that presents its own problems, right? Later on.
Yep.
But yeah, this is why he creates the Silmarils in the first place. So what were they like? I'll read this one. As three great jewels they were in form, but not until the end, when Fëanor shall return, who perished ere the sun was made, and sits now in the halls of awaiting, and comes no more among his kin. Not until the sun passes and the moon falls shall it be known of what substance they were made. Like the crystal of diamonds it appeared, and yet was more strong than adamant, so that no violence could mar it or break it within the kingdom of Arda. Yet that crystal was to the Silmarils but as is the body to the children of Iluvatar, the house of its inner fire, that is within it and yet in all parts of it, and is its life. And the inner fire of the Silmarils Fëanor made of the blended light of the two trees, which lives in them yet, though the trees have long withered and shine no more. Therefore, even in the darkness of the deepest treasury, the Silmarils of their own radiance shone like the stars of Varda. And yet, as were they indeed living things, they rejoiced in light, and received it, and gave it back in hues more marvelous than before. So these are pretty amazing works. The couple of things to note, that it's really not about the jewels themselves, but it's about the light that they house, right? It was now I think we need to be careful. This is not, again, Tolkien, I think, is not saying that the outer, the outer trappings of the jewels, right, were not important at all, right? Tolkien was not the kind of guy who says that, like, well, we're just spirits, and these bodies of ours are just meat suits that we put on for a little while, right? Like, that wasn't really a metaphysics of the human person that he ascribes to, right? His view is that the body and the soul are both part of crucial parts of what the human being is, right? And so, he's just making this parallel between, like, that there's two aspects, right? There are these two major aspects. There is the outer part of us, right, the what you see, and then there's the inner part, right? The what you get on the inside that maybe hews a little closer to the fullness of the nature, or at least the potential, right, of the person. So we have this inner fire, which is the blended light of the trees of Valinor, right? So he somehow manages to capture the light of the two trees of Valinor, some bit of it, the blended light, right, and place it within these jewels.
And that blended light was like the hallowed part, right? Didn't we talk about that?
Yeah.
It's described earlier, I think, in the Silmarillion as that the blending of the light is considered like the holiest of the light.
Yeah, and I love, when I wrote my book Tolkien's Requiem on the story of Beren and Luthien, and I really tie the lore of the two trees and the Silmarils together with the story of Beren and Luthien, because I see a very strong parallel between the blending of the light of the two trees, right? I think there's a clear case to be made that, Telperion, the silver, represents elves, and Lorelin, the gold, represents men, right? One is the stars, one is the sun, elves, stars, men, sun, and then you have the blending of those two lights, and you have that with Beren and Luthien, right? And their love, right? You have a man and an elvish maiden, right? Coming together. And so, we see again, like, this theme of, like, the most beautiful light is the blended light, right? Is that blended light, coming together there. So anyway, and of course we know, like, the legacy of their love and what that leads to in terms of other characters throughout the Legendarium. It leads to the people of Numenor. It leads to Aragorn, right? Ultimately in Lord of the Rings. So, so this blended light that it contains is very important. And I will also say that, I find it interesting that they call it the inner fire, and that of course calls to mind for me Melkor searching for this, like, the flame imperishable, right? Before, during Ainulindale, right? So any other thoughts on this passage, Greta?
Yeah, I think what struck me was that they're referred to as living things, these Silmarils, and which is a little mind-blowing to me because,
yes,
I mean, they're jewels, right? And we think of jewels as inanimate objects.
Right.
So that I didn't quite know what to make of, because like, I understand, like, maybe in light of what you were just talking about, like, is that just Tolkien's way of explaining that these actually have a soul? Like, they're actually not inanimate, that they have something in them, or Fëanor put something, part of his own self, into them, kind of like a Horcrux.
Well, you think about that too, and you think about how at least the One Ring is somewhat like that, right? Like it's kind of like that, right?
That's
It almost seems like
true.
it has it's spoken of in Lord of the Rings, like it has its own mind, like it has its own presence. So I think there is something to that, right? Like, is it that? And in that case, I believe it's I believe it's somewhat because Sauron put himself into it, right?
Right.
And that's why he needs to get it back, right?
Yes. Okay.
And so with you committed a strike by throwing in Harry Potter lore, by mixing in Harry Potter lore, but I won't hold
Not
it
a
against
strike.
you.
It's not a strike.
I won't hold it against you. Everybody else probably will, but not
No,
me.
I know they won't.
So we've got the One Ring, which Sauron put part of himself into, and we've got the Silmarils, which, yes, I would say that Fëanor probably put something of himself into, and because don't we always put, like, whenever we create something, we put something of ourselves into it, like we
do.
use the language of like, man, I really put my all into that, right? I really put my all into that work,
That's true.
like, and I know the feeling, right? Like, it was exhausting to write Tolkien's Overture, right? It was like, I have other things I want to write, like other works I want to write on Tolkien's topics, but I have not had that same fire to write since I finished that book. And every time we record a podcast, every time we record something, I put part of myself into it. So I think there is a lot of truth in this, in that particular regard.
That's a good point.
And I think that, but I think it also, like, that the Silmarils are able to, like, take light that comes into them and present it back as something even more beautiful.
Yeah.
Also says something like that I do think that there's something about the Silmarils that raises them to an even higher level, and it's partly due to the fact that they have this light of the trees within them, right? I think that's their soul,
their life force. Yeah, it's almost like they're a part of the community. Like, it's almost like they're, I mean, you think of that's what in a community, that's what its members do, right? Is they rejoice in one another, and they receive help, and then they return help. Like, it's an active, living role. So it's really interesting that they're described that way.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, Varda hallows them, it says. Varda hallows them. She hallowed the Silmarils, so that thereafter no mortal flesh, nor hands unclean, nor anything of evil will might touch them. But it was scorched and withered, and Mondos foretold that the fates of Arda, earth, sea, and air lay locked within them. So
her hallowing was not effective. Is that what that means? When it says, but it was scorched and withered?
Oh, no, that's just kind of, he's using, like, a rhetorical form that we don't normally use now, so I see why you're confused by that. But it's saying, she hallows them, so that thereafter no mortal flesh, nor hands unclean, nor anything of evil will might touch them. And if it did touch them, it would be scorched and withered.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. So that explains why, like, when anybody touches the Silmarils, that's what happens. Okay.
Yeah. Exactly.
Cool.
Gotcha. And of course Mondos, so Varda does that, and then Mondos, foretells that the fates of Arda, earth, sea, and air lay locked within them.
Those are some special jewels.
Absolutely. And of course the earth, sea, and air is interesting because that corresponds to Aule, Olmo, and Manwë there too. So and their particular realms, if you will.
And it's interesting that the creation of these Silmarils is something that the Valar approved of, right? Even though it was maybe...
I mean, I guess you could say that, right?
I mean, if Varda's going to hallow them.
Well, yeah, I would say after the fact, I suppose they approved of them, right?
Okay, they didn't like.
Well,
commission.
It says
them.
He created them in secret, right? So they did not commission them,
right?
But it would appear that at least Varda and Mondos, like, approved of them, and for all we know, like, there was just a lot of this going on, right? There was a lot of this sort of creativity going on, and so it wasn't necessarily that Fëanor, like, it was like a bad thing that he created in secret necessarily, like, per se. It might have just been like that, like, they were all like all of the elves and like other, like, the Blessed Realm was a place of, I think, great creativity, right? And beauty.
Yeah.
And fashioning wonderful things. Like, that's kind of what these creatures were put in the world to do.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely.
And so, yeah, so Varda hallows them, and so they are, you wouldn't want to pick one up with your bare hand. Let's just put it that way. So, all right, so jumping ahead, of course, Melkor has been released. He's been out of prison for about 50 years, 50 Valinorian years now, 500 of our own sun years, and this is what it says about Melkor when he learns of the Silmarils. Do you want to read that?
Yes. Then Melkor lusted for the Silmarils, and the very memory of their radiance was a gnawing fire in his heart. From that time forth, inflamed by his desire, he sought ever more eagerly how he should destroy Fëanor and end the friendship of the Valar and the elves. But he dissembled his purposes with cunning, and nothing of his malice could yet be seen in the semblance that he wore.
Yeah. So, inflamed by his desire, he sought ever more eagerly how he could destroy Fëanor and end the friendship of the Valar and the elves. But he's doing this knowing that like he's not yet able to like really, be full on Melkor like he used to be, right? Right? He's still kind of what do they call it when a person gets let out of prison? He's kind of still on, if not officially on probation. He's like viewed as being on probation. Like everybody's kind of watching him, probably. So he knows that he's got to be careful. But he is Melkor, and he's crafty and he's cunning. So he starts doing very, very Melkor-ish things.
So when would he have seen them? Like just in his wanderings of.
Well, I think we learned that the Silmarils become known, right? They become known. We learned that Fëanor liked to like wear them, like he had like a crown that he liked to wear them in.
Yeah.
And but to me it's just interesting to think about like, well, why does he lust for them, right? Why is the very memory of their radiance a gnawing fire in his heart? And I think, again, I alluded to this earlier, but I think it goes back to the idea that the light that's contained within these Silmarils is something like that flame imperishable that Melkor was searching for in the first place, right? That there is something like this is like the holiest of light that is available in Arda, right? Whether it is like the very like essence of Iluvatar, I'm not sure it goes to that level, but there's something here that everybody is drawn to, right? And you think about that, and I think about this as something of a metaphor for like just the most beautiful things, like the most beautiful art, right? There's that thing that you just can't put your finger on, right? Like and maybe it's in a song you love, or it's in like a person, like maybe it's in your your spouse or something like that, right? Like there's just a certain spark within beautiful things that we find beautiful that is like you can never quite find the words to explain it, right? You can never quite find the words to explain it, but you're drawn to it. And I think that's what's going on here. And I think Melkor, like he wants to possess. He's like, this guy, this little punk, figured out how to do what I was not able to do. Right? He figured out how to capture this light, capture that imperishable flame that I could never get my hands on, right? That I wanted from the very beginning, right?
Yeah.
And so not only does he want this light, but he really hates Fëanor because Fëanor figured out how to do what he couldn't do.
That's a really good insight.
I mean, that's
for sure.
That's what I do with it. So.
No, I feel like you have that that link between the soul, just the fact that there's part of Fëanor in these, and that these are living jewels. That there, I think it has a lot to do with the soul of the jewels that's probably causing this desire in him. Because you think about like. A lot of times when you can't put your finger on something that you love about something, it goes much deeper than the the superficial level. Like it's a soul thing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's why you refer to people as your soulmate, or Anna Green Gables as the bosom, a bosom friend or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It goes deeper than what's on the surface.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's at play here. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's see what Melkor was up to, right? So what does he do? It says, long was he at work, and slow at first, and barren was his labor. But he that sows lies in the end shall not lack of a harvest, and soon he may rest from toil indeed, while others reap and sow in his stead. So I love that, like, just the proverbial nature of that, right? He who sows and lies in the end shall not lack of a harvest.
Mm-hmm.
And all you have to do is like sow a few lies to start, and then other people will pick up those lies and run with them, right? Like, not even knowing that they're necessarily picking up those lies and running with them, right? All you got to do is sow. I feel like that's like the mantle, like that's like the almost the every propagandist out there, every professional propagandist out there that's existed in history, this is like their proverb that they like wake up to and recite to themselves, right? Okay, I know we're not seeing any fruits from our lies yet, but hey, he who sows lies in the end shall not lack of a harvest, right? Just got to remember that. Just got to remember that, old Goebbels, right? He was like the chief propagandist for the Nazi party, right? He's just like that was like his mantra every day, right? Mm-hmm. Just got to get up and just sow those lies, and the harvest will come. The harvest will come, yeah. Mm-hmm. And it goes on, and really what the biggest thing that Melkor is able to accomplish here is he's able to really put a divide not just amongst the Noldor, but he's able to put a divide between the Noldor and the Valar, right? So Greta, can you read this yellow passage right here?
Visions he would conjure in their hearts of the mighty realms that they could have ruled at their own will, in power and freedom in the east, and then whispers went abroad that the Valar had brought the Eldar to Aman because of their jealousy, fearing that the beauty of the Quindi and the Maker's power that Iluvatar had bequeathed to them would grow too great for the Valar to govern, as the elves waxed and spread over the wide lands of the world.
Yeah, so and we go on to learn a little bit that there's this idea that these other children are coming soon. These other children of Iluvatar are coming soon too, right? And they have not arrived yet, so they don't really know what men are, and they don't really know too much about what their nature will be. But there's some discussion of that, and but really, like, the lie that he tells them is that, like, look, you guys thought you were getting a good deal by coming over here to the Blessed Realm, and really what's happened is the Valar have prevented you from ruling, these wide lands across the sea that could have been yours, right? And now you're just kind of like, playing second fiddle over here in the Blessed Realm, right? Mm-hmm. And we think back to that whole debate we had a few episodes ago where it's like, should they have summoned them or not, yeah. Right? And of course Olmo, was the one who was like, don't do it, right? Let them stay, right? And the rest of the Valar were like, no, we need to bring them over. So this is perhaps the most insidious of all the lies, right? That that the Valar are trying to hold them back, right? The Valar are trying to hold the Noldor back, and and that's that becomes kind of the biggest complaint, and a complaint that will ultimately maybe cause the biggest ultimate problems here, right? Yeah. There are wounds that could have been healed had this particular lie not been sown. But then we also get back to the question of, should the Valar really, even though the Valar did not truly mean it this way to have them come, was it really a good idea to do this to them, right? To say, like, once and especially even to say, like, once you're here, you can't go back, right? Once you're here, you can't go back.
And you mentioned too about the coming of men. Like, the Valar know this, so Melkor knows it. He doesn't know a whole lot because he wasn't really paying attention during the third theme because he's Melkor. But he also uses that against them. Fuel for this fire. Be like, yeah, not only do they want or do they want to keep close tabs on you. Not only could your lives have been that much better, but guess what? They're about to get even worse, because now you're gonna have this other race coming, right? That's going to be competing with you for dominion and attention and all the things.
Right.
So he's really pulling out all the stops here.
Yeah, he is. And, there's just so many, it very much just feels like the parallels are strong, I'd say, with the Genesis account, right? Genesis 3 account of the serpent in the garden, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about that too.
And just this idea of like, saying, paraphrasing, but basically saying to Adam and Eve, like, God's trying to hold back from you, right? He's trying to hold all the good stuff back from you.
He really doesn't want what's best for you.
Yeah, he really doesn't want you to have like all the cool stuff that you could have. Just saying, right? All you got to do if you want it is actually, just eat this apple. So.
And that's also the,
or eat this fruit. It's not. We don't know this an apple. Anyway.
But yeah, right. But it also brings to mind the temptation of Christ, right? In his 40 days in the desert, when that's the first thing when Satan's trying to get him to, to fall. Basically, as he says, "Hey, aren't you God? Then all of this that you see, this can be yours.
Right.
Just say the word." So again, that's just kind of this innate, this innate desire, I think, that we all have for dominion. And power that he's appealing to. Yeah,
and it's interesting. Yeah, he is appealing like to their sense of like dominion and of rulership, and of course, that's one thing Melkor really desires is to dominate. Right? He wants to dominate, not in the sense of ruling with justice and for flourishing, but in the sense of being able to like assert his pride and his and his strength. Right. Yep. And he starts to sow that attitude amongst the Noldor as well.
Yeah.
All right. So this leads to just various forms of conflict among the Noldor. We have the Noldor versus the Valar. Here's what it says about that. Thus, ere the Valar were aware the peace of Valinor was poisoned, the Noldor began to murmur against them, and many became filled with pride, forgetting how much of what they had and knew came to them in gift from the Valar. Fiercest burned the new flames of desire for freedom and wider realms in the eager heart of Fëanor. And Melkor laughed in his secrecy, for to that mark his lies had been addressed, hating Fëanor above all and lusting ever for the Silmarils. And so it's Fëanor who really wants to go. If Fëanor is a really fascinating figure. He is apparently has like a super creative powers, and he also just has this strong desire to to go exploring. He lives far away from where most of the people live in the Blessed Realm, and it would seem he wants to go and back to where they came from in Middle Earth, and really explore those areas and probably set up his own kingdom far away.
Yep. Yeah.
We also get a little note on Fëanor's greedy love. For Fëanor began to love the Silmarils with a greedy love, and grudged the sight of them to all save to his father and his 7 sons. He seldom remembered now that the light within them was not his own. So there's this note that even though the Silmarils were created by him, like there is a certain question of the light of them not being only his, right? That it's something that, and that's of course true, right? That the light of the 2 trees, like literally he didn't create that, right? It's something he's able to capture in there. But I think this is such an incredible statement in the sense of, how we were talking about like the light of like the inner light of any particular creation, right? And how so often we want to, possess a certain like this desire to possess certain things is within all of us, right? When we think something's particularly wonderful, particularly beautiful, we want to possess it. But when we strive to possess it, something happens to the thing and something happens to us. That's not good.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of expand on that a bit, it's interesting that we have these two notes here just real close together about how the Noldor as a group began to forget how much of what they had and knew came to them in gift from the Valar.
Yeah.
And then Fëanor forgetting like that he did not himself create this light I mean, that's the lie that the devil wants all of us to believe, right? It's like you didn't like you. He wants us to think that we are self sufficient and that we, because that's what fuels that pride. And the Noldor, when they began to forget that, so much of what they had and knew was a gift from the Valar that they themselves were not responsible for. You really begin to lose perspective, and it's just kind of this slippery slope. And
Yeah.
so it's the beginning of terrible things.
Yeah, for sure. We also see the wedge that's driven between Fëanor and his half-brother. So, Greta, can you read this paragraph in orange here?
High princes were Fëanor and Fingolfin, the elder sons of Finwë, honored by all in Aman, but now they grew proud and jealous each of his rights and his possessions. Then Melkor set new lies abroad in Eldamar, and whispers came to Fëanor that Fingolfin and his sons were plotting to usurp the leadership of Finwë and of the elder line of Fëanor, and to supplant them by the leave of the Valar. For the Valar were ill-pleased that the Silmarils lay in Tirion, and were not committed to their keeping. But to Fingolfin and Finarfin it was said, "Beware, small love has the proud son of Miriel ever had for the children of Indis. Now he has become great, and he has his father in his hand. It will not be long before he drives you forth from Tuna."
Yeah. And it's interesting to me. I look at the last part, right? To Fingolfin and Finarfin, it was said, "Beware, small love has the proud son of Miriel, has Fëanor for you," essentially. And I have to go back and find. So was it Melkor saying that? And I think I think the message here is yes, that it was Melkor saying that, but it might not have been him saying that directly. It might have been part of this just web of lies and mistrust that he was sowing, right? Amongst the Noldor. Yeah. And eventually, you know how this works. You just start to view everyone with suspicion, and you really have to be mindful. Even when it is such a it really is an insidious trap, like the trap of words, of gossip, of propaganda, of all these things. They are meant to do something, and that is to accelerate our judgment of others, right? That is to accelerate past what is truly known and what is truly certain into a realm of false certainty, where it's like, your brother, if he had the way, your half brother, Fëanor, he would just be done with you guys, right? He would probably kill you, right? If he had the chance, right? And it's just like it's just you get mistrust that's maybe based on something that truly happened, but then you have other like rumors, right? Well, did you hear about this? I think I heard that this happened, right? And it just becomes this thing where eventually you're like, oh, I can't trust that person anymore, even though you're like, who do I trust? Right? Who do I trust? Yeah. I just feel like that's the world we live in today. Like social media feels like the grand accelerator of all of this. I'm not saying that Tolkien was writing this about social media either. I'm just saying that the applicability idea, right, is just works so well. Social media amplifies a human dynamic, right? And it makes me think it's like kind of a tool that maybe I've had to stop many times in the last several years, that it's a tool that we're not actually ready for as the human race. So I know you agree with that.
For sure. That's why I'm not on it.
Right.
Because I know I'm not ready. I can't handle it. But it's interesting here too that with his plan of attack here, Melkor, he first starts large, right? He starts with trying to drive this wedge between the Noldor and the Valar, and then he just kind of kind of hones in on Fëanor, and then he starts messing with the family dynamic, and that's that is like, I feel like that's the greatest evil of all, is when he starts driving wedges between the brothers. I mean, that's like a whole other level of evil in my mind.
Yeah, I have this thought in my head right now of like, destructivity is Melkor's creativity. Like, it's like, I'm going to sow this little lie right here and just kind of see what happens. Sometimes you'll see this in like a comedy show where it's like, like certain characters who are kind of like darker but funny characters like do things that are like, I'm just going to like tell this person this and see what happens. And it can be funny, like in that context, to see like the problems it causes and that sort of thing. But it's also true to life. And if if it wasn't actually a comedy show you were watching, if it wasn't a sitcom you were watching, it would be really funny. Like it would be actually really dark and ugly what actually happens, right? Between different characters. And so like Melkor is he's this guy. He just like that's like this is his creativity. He's like going in and he's being like, what could I say? What is the fitting word I could say right now that would just really like blow up this situation? And it's kind of like the idea of, when you put a stick of dynamite into into something, you don't know how, you don't actually know the actual chaos it's going to cause, other than it's just going to make a mess, right?
You don't know the extent of it though.
Right. And then you kind of see see whatever happens afterwards, and you're like, well, that was a really cool mess, but could I do better? Maybe. Could I make an even greater mess?
Bigger mess. Well, that makes sense, because we know that Melkor himself is unable to create anything of his own volition. So that's the only means he has of creating is by destruction. Mm-hmm. So that's what he's leaning on here.
Yeah. Well, so we learned that Fëanor, up until now, really, there haven't been like weapons in the Blessed Realm. For all they're making, there have not been weapons, but we learned that the Noldor begin to make weapons, both offensive and defensive. They start kind of brandishing their defensive weapons, and nobody really shows off their offensive weapons at first, because they don't want to like bring that into the equation. But eventually, we do get those, and so jump ahead here, and then we have conflict between not just the Noldor and the Valar, but now between Fëanor and the Valar. And here's what it says there. For Fëanor now began openly to seek words of rebellion against the Valar, crying aloud that he would depart from Valinor back to the world without, and would deliver the Noldor from thraldom if they would follow him. So Fëanor is finally like, these lies of you could have all of this across the sea, right? The Valar wanted to take this from you. Fëanor finally just buys into it and is, falls for the manipulation, and, he basically is just calling to be, to have the freedom to be able to go, right?
He drank Melkor's Kool-Aid.
Yeah. Without knowing it, right? Without wanting to.
Yeah.
This was not an intentional thing. Mm-hmm. Well, at least.
Well.
It's.
He made a choice.
Well, and see, the thing is, that's the thing. Like Melkor knew what he was doing by highlighting this thing, because he knew that these people, the elves, had first appeared in a far distant land, right? And he was like, he knew that some of them had stayed behind because they didn't want to leave. They didn't want to make the journey, right? Yeah. So he's like, there's something in these elves that maybe they want to go back, right? Maybe they want to go back. So he was able to like pinpoint that and manipulate it. So,
crafty.
Yeah, and then we have the conflict between Fëanor and Fingolfin. So Greta, can you read this here?
Yes. But even as Fingolfin spoke, Fëanor strode into the chamber, and he was fully armed, his high helm upon his head, and at his side a mighty sword. So it is, even as I guessed, he said. My half-brother would be before me with my father, and in this as in all other matters. Then turning upon Fingolfin, he drew his sword, crying, Get thee gone, and take thy due place. Fingolfin bowed before Finwë, and without word or glance to Fëanor, he went from the chamber. But Fëanor followed him, and at the door of the king's house he stayed him. And the point of his bright sword he set against Fingolfin's breast. See, half-brother, he said, this is sharper than thy tongue. Try but once more to usurp my place in the love of my father, and maybe it will rid the Noldor of one who seeks to be the master of thralls. These words were heard by many, for the house of Finwë was in the great square beneath the Mindon. But again Fingolfin made no answer, and passing through the throng in silence, he went to seek Finarfin, his brother.
Yeah, and it, a preface that by saying that this is all. So basically, Fingolfin goes to Finwë to try to tell him, like, look, Fëanor is advocating for rebelling against the Valar and going back across the sea,
which he was,
yeah. And so, Fingolfin basically is trying to make the case with Finwë, like, you got to do something about this, right? You got to do something about this, and he's not necessarily saying like, I want my brother's place. He's saying, you gotta stop him, right? You're his father. Like you're maybe the only one that can stop this from happening. It's destructive. It's gonna cause all these problems.
And that's where you were talking about before, these lies are just breeding suspicion, right? I mean, clearly Fëanor is being completely unreasonable and illogical. And his brother was just talking to his dad. Like, he has the right to do that, right? Fëanor has no clue what they're talking about. He's become paranoid, though. These lies have made him paranoid, and so he just assumes, oh, they're talking about me and they're trying to rat me out, and which, of course he was doing, but it just shows how, like, just the toll that this place that Fëanor now finds himself in is just, it's a really dark place, and he's just assuming the worst of everyone.
Yeah, well, and of course it, there is something in here of, like, part of it is, the tragic loss that Fëanor and Finwë suffered with the death of Fëanor's mother, right? And that, Finwë did decide to remarry and had these two other sons by a different woman, and so
he feels a little threatened, probably.
So he's perpetually felt threatened, I'm sure, right? And there's been a divide between them, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
For a long time. But, the end result of this is, of course, that Fëanor basically threatens with the point of a sword his half-brother. And this is the first time that's happened in the Blessed Realm. So this is bad news. And and of course, as a result, the Valar summon Fëanor to the council, right? Yeah. And they're going to hold him to account for this. And this will reveal the deception of Melkor. So here's what it says. There also were summoned all others who had any part in this matter or any knowledge of it, and Fëanor, standing before Mondos in the Ring of Doom, was commanded to answer all that was asked of him. Then at last the root was laid bare, and the malice of Melkor revealed. And straightway Tulkas left the council to lay hands upon him and bring him again to judgment. So Fëanor, they kind of find out all the facts, and they're like, okay, Melkor is behind a lot of this, and of course Tulkas is like, he's like the dog on a leash, and they're just like, okay, Tulkas, go get him, right? And he's like, yes, right, finally, you guys clowns are waking up, right?
Too bad it had to come to this point before that happened, but
and we read of Mondos's sentence to speaks on behalf of the Valar and sentences Fëanor. So Greta, do you want to read this?
Mondos said to him, "Thou speakest of thraldom. If thraldom it be, thou canst not escape it. For Manwë is king of Arda, and not of Aman only. And this deed was unlawful, whether in Aman or not in Aman. Therefore this doom is now made. For 12 years thou shalt leave Tirion, where this threat was uttered. In that time take counsel with thyself, and remember who and what thou art. But after that time this matter shall be set in peace and held redressed, if others will release thee." Then Fingolfin said, "I will release my brother." But Fëanor spoke no word in answer, standing silent before the Valar. Then he turned and left the council and departed from Valmar.
Yeah,
he set on retreat.
What's that?
He set to retreat, rehab, whatever. Right?
Yeah. Well, 12 years, I think I would take that to mean 12 Valinorian years, so that's 120 of our years. So it's not a short time, but, and these are elves too, so they live for a long time.
Yeah.
And they have been alive for a long time.
Right.
And it's not like he's being put in jail. He's basically just being sent back to his own home, right?
Right. He's being banished. So he basically gets what he wants, right?
Kind of.
I mean, that's what he was threatening to do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of weird.
I really I was thinking about what Fingolfin says. He immediately says, "I will release my brother." And your first inclination is like, well, that's gracious of him. He just threatened his life, and now he releases him. But I'm also kind of like, well, that was the right move, Fingolfin. But I'm not sure you should have actually spoken right then and there, because it kind of makes you look like, look how wonderful I am. I'm going to release my brother right here in front of all of you, right? And right here where he can't possibly do me any harm, right? It's like, maybe it would have been better just to wait until after Fëanor was gone and say, look, I released my brother. I didn't want to make a big show about it, but I do. I don't have any ill will against him. That would have been, I think, a much better way of handling it, because all that probably did was make Fëanor that much more like me. I released my brother. Oh, how noble of you! I don't need you to release me, right? Like I can totally see Fëanor reacting that way.
For sure.
Yeah.
No, I think you're spot on. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, aren't you so good, Fingolfin? Aren't you just a good little boy?
But I feel like the Valar are kind of like rewarding his bad behavior. Fëanor's bad behavior.
Giving him kind of what he wants.
Yeah. I mean, they played right into his hands.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like it maybe would have been smarter to keep him where they could see him.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not saying necessarily put him in jail, but I don't know. I don't know what a good alternative would have been, but it seemed like somewhere closer where he could be kept closely tabulated would have been a good thing.
But would that have caused more problems, right? Like it's kind of like, here you are, we'll give you, I don't know if this was the right punishment to them, but what other options did they have, right? Because they don't really want him to leave.
But they're sending him away.
Yeah.
So I don't.
Well, I mean, they don't want him to leave over to Middle Earth, right? To go back.
I see what you're
to leave
saying.
the Blessed Realm.
I see. Okay, so they send him where?
Back to Formenos, right?
Okay.
So it says, next paragraph says,
So like, he's actually not getting what he wanted, right? Because he wanted to go back to Middle Earth, isn't that?
Well, yeah, he wanted to go back. Well, yes, but I guess in the sense of like, so I guess maybe he didn't get exactly what he wanted, but in the sense of like, he just wanted to be left alone to like make, to make stuff. I don't think this was like the worst thing that could have happened to him.
Okay.
But yeah, I just don't know that there was any good way of dealing with Fëanor at this point, right?
Other than locking him up and taking away his Silmarils.
Right,
and that would have had a whole other probably issue.
Is that just going to make the problem worse at some point, right? Because the Noldor there's already like kind of this fomenting sense of rebellion amongst the Noldor in general.
And Fëanor, we clearly is not in his right mind. He's very unpredictable. So
I mean, it just goes to show that there's like as much as when you hear about crimes being committed and that kind of thing, you especially if they're egregious crimes, you're just like, oh man, lock them up and throw away the key. Like it's just usually that's just not the best answer. Usually you have to consider other things and think to yourself like, there's a lot of competing factors in this situation, and what do they truly hope for? And again, like we get this sense throughout the Silmarillion in the early part especially, that the Valar are, despite all of their being like these powerful spiritual beings, that to some degree they are naive, and they are learning as they go along too how to be the powers that govern the world. Yeah. Right.
They're just baby gods and goddesses.
There's truth to that, right? They're just little kiddo goddess and godlets, right?
Godlets.
Right. They're not. They are somewhat naive, and they don't always have the right answers, or the best answers. Right? They're trying to learn, and they. So I don't know that I could have come up with something better in this particular situation. Honestly,
I know. We always think we could have, right? Because hindsight is 20/20, and whatever. But yeah. No, I'm sure they're doing the best they can.
I mean, maybe it's just like, look, Fëanor, like all Noldor, like we need to look. This place is a place of no weapons. We are the ones who protect it. So you give us your weapons. If you have weapons, then that is a punishment by banishment or whatever, or being put into prison, right? We'll be the ones that control the security of the Blessed Realm. Maybe that was the right way to handle it, instead of like banishing him for a period of time. But anyway, let's look at this banishment. So with him into banishment went his 7 sons, and northward in Valinor they made a strong place and treasury in the hills, and there at Formenos a multitude of gems were laid in hoard, and weapons also, and the Silmarils were shut in a chamber of iron. Thither also came Finwë the king, because of the love that he bore to Fëanor, and Fingolfin ruled the Noldor in Tirion. Thus the lies of Melkor were made true and seeming, though Fëanor by his own deeds had brought this thing to pass, and the bitterness that Melkor had sown endured and lived still long afterwards between the sons of Fingolfin and Fëanor. So yeah, they go into this to this fortress Formenos, and that's where their banishment is. But it's not the end of the chapter. We get a visit from Melkor. Pays them a visit. So, Greta, do you want to read this?
Scary. Yes. It is told that for a time Melkor was not seen again in Valinor, nor was any rumor heard of him, until suddenly he came to Formenos and spoke with Fëanor before his doors. Friendship he feigned with cunning argument, urging him to his former thought of flight from the trammels of the Valar. And he said, Behold the truth of all that I have spoken, and how thou art banished unjustly. But if the heart of Fëanor is yet free and bold, as were his words in Tirion, then I will aid him, and bring him far from his narrow land. For am I not Vala also? Yea, and more than those who sit in pride in Valamar. And I have ever been a friend to the Noldor, most skilled and most valiant of the people of Arda. Now Fëanor's heart was still bitter at his humiliation before Mondos, and he looked at Melkor in silence, pondering if indeed he might yet trust him so far as to aid him in his flight. And Melkor, seeing that Fëanor wavered, and knowing that the Silmarils held his heart in thrall, said at the last, Here is a strong place, and well guarded, but think not that the Silmarils will lie safe in any treasury within the realm of the Valar. But his cunning overreached his aim. His words touched too deep, and awoke a fire more fierce than he designed. And Fëanor looked upon Melkor with eyes that burned through his fair semblance and pierced the cloaks of his mind, perceiving there his fierce lust for the Silmarils. Then hate overcame Fëanor's fear, and he cursed Melkor and bade him begone, saying, Get thee gone from my gate, thou jail-crow of Mondos. And he shut the doors of his house in the face of the mightiest of all the dwellers in Ea.
Yeah, so Melkor almost has him until Melkor brings up the Silmarils, and then he's like, oh, I see why you're here. I see why you're here.
Like this false flattery too. Like that's always a weapon of the enemy, right?
Oh yeah.
When he says, have I ever been a friend to the Noldor, most skilled and most valiant of the people of Arda? Yeah, he's just so creepy.
Yeah.
Very, very creepy.
Highly creepy. I mean, good on Fëanor for telling him to go away.
Yeah, this is a little bit hopeful, right? Like it kind of made me think, oh, maybe there's hope for Fëanor yet, that he's able to see through this. But what is it that causes him to see through it, right? It's his lust and greed of the Silmarils. So
right. Yeah. Ultimately, it's I think the lies have already, like, they've set Fëanor on a trajectory, and there's just not much that could hold him back. I don't know. We'll have to see. It'll be interesting debate in the next chapter to say, could Fëanor have been held back if what is going to happen had not happened? So could he have been healed? I would say of this great mistrust.
Is there,
because he seems like he's going to accept this banishment. This punishment at first, right? He's there in Formenos, and he's just kind of looks like he's biding his time, right? Now. He seems like he's still into his weapons and everything, so there is that.
There's that.
He doesn't really seem very penitent yet, but it's like maybe with time he would have grown more penitent, right? Yeah. He would have had time to think about everything and be like, a lot of this was really due to Melkor. Maybe I shouldn't be so hard-hearted towards my half-brothers, for the sake of my father. And his father came with him, right? Which says to me like his father wanted to help Fëanor, right? Like kind of heal from all this mistrust, Yeah. So
absolutely.
Anyway, and so it seems that peace returns, but of course, as you could probably tell from reading, it's there's some, like, Melkor isn't just leaving; he's up to something. So
always,
and we'll find out what that is in the next chapter.
Yep.
All right. So you ready for some haiku, Greta?
Let's do it.
All right. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Oh, you got it. All right.
I'm going to go first.
Okay.
All right. Actually, you have yours pulled up, don't you?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. Jewels kindled, crafted by spirit of fire, dark shadows take form.
Ooh, I like that. It's really good.
Yeah.
Very, very good. All right, here's mine. Evil whisperings. Worm tongue's forerunner. Melkor's lies mar joy, breed doubt.
Nice.
Dun, dun, dun.
Nice. I like it.
I got a Lord of the Rings reference in there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Worm tongue. Yeah.
He's basically a lesser Melkor.
Well, we have a haiku to read from Red Hawk, one of our patrons.
Oh yeah. Red Hawk's always so good about getting his haiku in.
He is. It's
love it.
fantastic.
Yeah.
It's on a roll.
Mm-hmm.
Here we go. Most powerful of all, or I'm sorry, let me try that again.
Mm-hmm.
Most powerful all, door slammed in his face wrathful, Fëanor his foe.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
Yes. Very good.
Good.
Very, very good.
Good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
I love that image of Fëanor slamming the door
Yeah.
in the face of a Valar. Ha!
It's
awesome.
good stuff for sure. It's good
Yes.
stuff. Yeah, send us your haiku, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Love to read them on the episode.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or your platform of choice. If you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, you can really help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps get the word out about the Tolkien Road, which helps us to keep on evering on. And drop us a line elsewhere, right? YouTube comments via our website, comments on the episodes on the website. You can reach us all kinds of places, and we do our best to respond in due time. We do our best. That's all we can say at this point. So,
Which actually, that's a very generous we there, because you should say that John does his best, because...
Well, you do, yeah. I send certain ones that are like really, really cool. I'll forward them to you, and
that's true. But you're the one that always responds and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to take that off your plate at one point, and it just didn't work out very well. So
yeah. Well, it's all
you're
good.
You're really good at it.
It's all good. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you to our amazing patrons,
Mm-hmm.
especially the following: John R.,
Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien,
Jacob Lockham,
Ms. Anonymous,
Andrew T.,
Red Hawk,
Shannon S.,
Brian O,
Emilio P.,
Zeke F,
James A.,
James L,
Chris L.,
Chuck F,
Azia V.,
Ish of the Hammer,
Teresa C.,
David of Pints with Jack,
Jonathan D.,
Eric S,
Eric B.,
Johanna T,
Mike M.,
Robert H,
Paul D.,
Julia,
Werty,
Matthew W,
Joe Bagelman,
Chris K,
Jacob S.,
and Don J.
as well as those celebrating their patron anniversary this month in April of 2022, Julia,
Rebecca R,
Jonathan D.,
and Ty M.
Thank you all so much,
Thank you,
everybody.
guys.
We really appreciate your support, and thanks to everybody for listening. We will talk at you next time.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.